Good evening. This is Nancy Bowen, and I'm happy to present for you this evening the Committee on Ministry, or the Committee on Shared Ministry webinar for the Pacific Western region. Our timing tonight, about an hour and 15 minutes from 7 p.m. to 8:15 Pacific time. So I will start our time together with a chalice lighting. This I especially liked and found it in our brand new UU World, an edition which you might have received today also. Words by Lila Ibrahim. We are not in church to be with people who want to sing the same music, or rally for the same cause, or attend the same retreats. We are in church to learn to love better. And learning to love better can only happen when we love past our disappointments and return to a place of acceptance and affirmation. This is true in our personal lives, in our work lives, and in our church lives. It is a deep spiritual practice. So I want to just quickly give you an overview of our time together so that you have a notion of what we plan to cover. And if there's something urgent, you can put it in the text box, but this is kind of my contract with you. So we're going to review a little bit of the history, because in many of our congregations, the history and the changes that we're recommending in committees on ministry or committees on shared ministry, the shifting expectation is part of the struggle, and if we can understand it, we can work with it better. We're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about the opportunities a committee on ministry has to improve the ministry and the mission alignment and mission fulfillment in a congregation. Talk about some of the great characteristics of members of a committee on ministry. I know many of you are already committee on ministry members, so you'll find the great gifts that you bring to this endeavor. And then to talk about the selection of the committee. There have been many questions about this, and so we'll talk about some of the possible ways, though this is governed by your congregation's frequently bylaws or policies and procedures. And then working with Committee on Ministry. So the original model that we had began sometime in the 80s. It began to end in 1989, but I can't find an exact record of when we started to use it. It was called a Ministerial Relations Committee, or MRC, and you may find this in some of the documents of your congregation's references to committees of this title or that acronym. They were primarily focused on the minister. They were supportive of the minister, kind of a kitchen cabinet, a place for sounding out challenges or problems. Too often, the committee became involved in defending the minister or explaining the minister. They did a lot on compensation recommendations. You'll remember, if you've been with us for more than a few years, that prior to the early 90s, we did not have equitable compensation recommendations, and so compensation was a very big issue in our congregations, and there were no guidelines to help congregations work with this. I think the most problematic characteristic of the old model was that this was a group specifically charged with being an ombuds group, to gather and address complaints about the minister. And in that context, you won't be surprised to know that they were also charged with the evaluation of the minister's performance. So this is very, very different from what you will be hearing me speak about the rest of our time together. But I think it's important for you to recognize where some misunderstandings in your own congregation or even in your own expectations of a committee on ministry might come from. We did do this. It was the recommended model for some number of years and began to change in about 1989. However, it's being a slow change even so. So the most important thing was that we needed to be able to demonstrate that our relationships inside our congregation are governed by our covenant, that we are living in relationship with one another. And while our churches are nonprofit organizations, we are doing something much more complex and much more important than simply running a nonprofit. So I actually prefer Committee on Ministries because I think it accentuates that this is not about the minister in the person of the minister, or ministers plural, but about the work that the congregation does, the work inside the congregation, the social change outside, whatever charitable work you do. So this is not about the governance of the congregation. It is about the ministry of the congregation. When I say that, I am making reference to Dan Hotchkiss's distinction in Governance and Ministry book, where he clarifies, I think very articulately, the role of governance and the role of ministry. We need both. Both are very important. One is not more important than the other, and they're not the same. So we kind of have quite a few practices in some of our congregations that tend to confuse them. We want to be talking about the coordination between ministry teams. In some of your congregations, these will be committees. I'm thinking that they are the hospitality or membership or faith formation or religious education. They're the committees or teams that provide the ministry inside your congregation and as your congregation meets the world. We'll also be talking considerably about mission alignment and how each of our ministry teams is accountable to the mission of the congregation. So this may be a change, and if it is a change, it would certainly be more effective if we have a committee to guide it, if we have a committee on ministry that understands this big picture and is willing to help ministry teams or committees align themselves toward mission and mission fulfillment. Then we do talk about ministry assessment, and here we're talking about assessment, a distinction that I'll make between assessment and performance evaluation, and also around the ministry rather than the person performing the ministry. So it would be assessment of how well the congregation is succeeding in building the beloved community, or how effective have our efforts towards social change become, or how well integrated is the transition in our faith development program between middle school and high school. So you can see very quickly, I think, that the ministry assessment aligns very closely to the inform, advise, and consult, which I frequently think of as a learning community. So what are we curious about in our ministries, and how do we want to be more effective in those? What do we want to learn about how well we are providing any particular ministry, whether it's worship, music, pastoral care, education, opportunities for individual members to share their gifts and ministry? So the earliest articulation of a committee on ministry was done by the Reverend Robert Latham when he was the minister of Jefferson Unitarian Church in Golden, Colorado. He tells me he did this in 1989. It didn't come across my desk until the early 90s, but that would be consistent. That was before we were all on the internet all the time and all of those kinds of things. And you will find that Robert has written about this extensively in his book, Moving from Church Folly Lane, which is also referenced on the UUA website. So that becomes another source for you that you can put in dialogue with my presentation tonight and have a good conversation inside your committee. The Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Santa Fe, New Mexico, calls their committee the Committee on Shared Ministry. And by that, they're trying to acknowledge that ministry is always shared, that the minister can only accomplish those things best suited to an educated and ordained minister, and must count on the members of the congregation and their gifts and their passion for the Unitarian Universalist message in order to provide sufficient ministries to fulfill any mission. Our goal in this is certainly always to provide more ministry and more goodness within the congregation and in the world. That's why we share this ministry. Okay. The Committee on Shared Ministry also recognizes the need to coordinate ministries for greater effectiveness. It matters how our ministry teams coordinate their various responsibilities, and too often I find that our ministry teams or committees are operating with very little information about what other teams are doing or how they're doing them. Sometimes there's even too little information about scheduling and calendars between different ministry teams. One of the questions we would ask is membership inviting people into a congregation that really exists? Are the promises, and I know that they're not always made in the form of here are our promises, but we are representing Unitarian Universalism in our hospitality and in our initial meeting of all new members. Have we created the congregation that is consistent with those first impressions that we offer? And the vast majority of the time, the first impressions that we offer are on our websites or in our public communications. The Committee on Shared Ministry, the Committee on Ministry, would be a reasonable place for a congregation to consider how are we representing ourselves publicly, and is that consistent with what someone would experience were they to visit us with only that information. Another coordination might be around faith formation. Is our faith formation program multi-generational? Is it specifically and consistently Unitarian Universalist? This would be part of fulfilling the promises that we've made in our public statements. And ministry is the key means of our mission fulfillment. Ministry is our fundamental tool. It is what we do. It's what we offer. And all of our work together is some form of ministry. I think often we think of ministry in a somewhat narrow perspective that might mean only worship and pastoral care, or worship, pastoral care, and rites of passage. But our ministry is very broad. It certainly includes those three, but it also includes small group ministries, everything done around faith formation, our social change work, our work towards building the beloved community. So ministry is our key tool toward fulfilling our mission, and therefore must be taken seriously and coordinated, education offered, assistance given, and this is one of the primary roles of the Committee on Ministry. The Committee on Ministry, it has some of the most exciting work in the congregation if it is peopled with learners, people who would be curious to learn what Unitarian Universalism has to offer, the spiritual but not religious. Or what do we mean now that we've started using the language of faith formation in the place where we used to use religious education? Is it exactly the same? What distinction are we trying to make? What information does the governance, does the membership need in order to understand the benefit of making some of these language changes, or the reasons why your congregation is deciding not to use them? Similarly, beloved community has become a very important aspect of many of our ministries. You can see that language in publications from the Unitarian Universalist Association, as well as in many of our social change workshops. What does beloved community mean in a Unitarian Universalist context? Is it the same as it was when Martin Luther King kind of so pivotally used it in one of his early speeches? Has it evolved? Does it mean something different to Unitarian Universalists than it might mean to other faith traditions? These would be the kinds of explorations that a Committee on Shared Ministry might pursue, and then be able to provide information, education, conversation, dialogue with the rest of the congregation. And because of all of these, I think the Committee on Ministry is best positioned to identify the assumptions and the blind spots that the congregation might be working with. This is for a combination of reasons. One, because the Committee on Ministry is invited to be something of a balcony kind of committee that is looking at the whole congregation. But also through some of this investigation and some of this bigger picture thinking, we began to see that some of our policies and procedures or some of the methodologies we're using in the congregation are not as consistent as they were 10 years ago, and that we might find the assumption that underlies that particular practice, so that we can develop strategies for effective change. And finally, I would want to be very clear that there is one committee on ministry, one committee on shared ministry per congregation. This is not a committee for each minister. And I think, under that we could eliminate potential blind spots and assumptions that would exist if we had multiple committees on ministry in one congregation, which is that it's about the minister and not the ministry, that the committee is a support group rather than partners in change and in support of the ministry. So one committee per congregation. That's just your summary slide. And now I'd be happy to take some questions. We're a little, we have plenty more, but it would be better to clarify this with any questions that you have before we move on.
And go ahead and put your comments or questions in the chat box. And we may just watch for those, and if there's none now, that's okay. And if so, I'll alert that.
Okay, we don't have any coming yet.
Catherine says they're good here, and Jim is wondering if you have a sample of policies.
A sample of policies for a committee on ministry?
See if he answers that. Yes.
Okay. I have a couple of different sets that congregations in Mountain Desert District have been developing, and I'm happy to share those. In the next day or two, I can post them with the recording of this. It's also one of those, and it's fine to have something that gets your conversation going. And it's pretty important that those be developed by the congregation with the congregation's history and sensibilities carefully in mind. So I wouldn't want you to think that this is a prototype that works equally well for all congregations.
Okay. And Maureen is wondering, this is about ministry, but does it include the minister, the Committee on Ministry?
The minister is a key participant in the Committee on Ministry. That's kind of what this creative partnership slide is designed to be about, that the committee working with the minister has this big perspective and has the opportunity to help all of the ministry teams be as effective as I know they want to be in offering the ministries they offer, in creating a culture where we care about how well we are doing Unitarian Universalism. We're willing to talk about assessment and effectiveness. We're willing to collaborate, develop creative partnerships between and among all the ministry teams. And the minister is a key part of that.
And Annie's wondering if you feel Reverend Latham's model is still current.
I think it's pretty good. I'll tell you at the end, the major thing that Robert and I disagree about, and Robert lives here in the Denver area, so we disagree about it up close and in person, is that you'll find in his book that he thinks the Committee on Ministry should be charged with creative conflict management. And I think that throws us back into the old model too much. And I don't think that the Committee on Ministry should be designated as the conflict management group in a congregation. But he has lots of good ideas, and I think that it's a very worthy articulation to put in conversation with others that you might find with this presentation, with your existing model, with other resources that you might find on the UUA website. And I'll give you that link at the end of our time together.
Bob is asking if you would clarify a little more of the difference governance versus ministry.
Yes, I would certainly recommend to you Dan Hotchkiss's book, Governance and Ministry. And his primary point there is that the governance function of the congregation, which would be the board and all board-related task forces, and is responsible for sustaining the financial, policy, procedural health of the congregation. He has quite an extensive outline of the policies, procedures, practices, and he charges the governance part of the congregation with clarity. It's being very clear about how different decisions should be made, and with providing the sustaining resources so that the ministries of the congregation can function. And then the ministry teams are those who are fulfilling the mission more directly. Certainly, I would never want to cut the board out of mission fulfillment. They are creating and sustaining the resources that we use to fulfill our mission. But the ministry teams are much more direct providers. Would you indicate whether that seems clearer to you? This is when it's really hard that I can't see any of you. No body language at all.
So Bob, let us know if that gives you a sufficient answer. In the meantime, Katie is wondering if you would talk a little bit more later about conflict management.
I will. Actually, we have a little bit of that at the end.
Thanks from Kate.
Okay. Are we ready to move?
Looks good.
Okay.
And folks, feel free to just put things in there, and we'll come back to them, so you don't have to hold them in their head.
So the Committee on Shared Ministry seeks to model the covenant within and beyond our congregation. And I feel just a little embarrassed that I was unclear that the minister is a key member, as all of you are key in this committee model. So let's discuss some of the characteristics of members of the Committee on Ministry. I think it's important that all the members of the committee be in good standing in the congregation. Back in the day, we would say they were pillars of the congregation, but certainly respected and active, participating members. That they have some experience with leadership so that they have a large enough context for your congregation and are not learning the congregation through this process. They will certainly learn more about the congregation and will have a greater appreciation for its capacity and diversity, but a little bit of orientation and leadership prior to being on the Committee on Ministry can be very helpful. I think it's very important that there are no other leadership responsibilities for each of you as you are on this committee. This is a big and important commitment that you have made, and avoiding other leadership responsibilities also allows us to avoid the temptation of triangulation of people trying to kind of put you in the middle of things that if you don't have too many responsibilities, you won't be invited into the middle of that. The capacity to think about the big picture, to see the complex whole that is your congregation. A willingness to learn. I've already spoken about some of the conversations that might be interesting to you to pursue. What do the spiritual but not religious, what are they seeking? It's kind of an oxymoron to say what are they seeking in church, because they've said they don't want to come to church. But in truth, that's not been our reality in Unitarian Universalism. We have quite a number of people who would similarly identify, and their experience of Unitarian Universalism is not what they were resisting when they said they were not religious. So it's very important for us to have a deeper understanding of this so that we don't think that things that come out in the popular culture have the same impact on us as they might be having on others. A level of self-awareness, the capacity to respond in a mature and insightful way, to be aware of themselves, to have the capacity to say something perhaps like, wow, I'm surprised I reacted so strongly to that. I'm going to have to figure out, whether that's pushing a button of mine or not, rather than continuing to be reactive. Certainly, it's important for the Committee on Ministry to be supportive of ministry. The ordained, called, or hired minister in your midst, and also the lay ministry, supportive of our major means of offering Unitarian Universalism to the world. The Committee on Ministry is not a place for trying to win over detractors. It's not a place for the person most critical of the minister for whatever reason. That person has their voice in the congregation and needs to be heard, but the Committee on Ministry is not the place for anti-clerical folks or people who are ministerial detractors. This is an important committee that is willing to share authority and responsibility to work in that creative partnership across all of our ministries. Good interpersonal skills are key. It's really nice if y'all like people and have a something of an ease of communicating. That can allow you to think on your feet and be able to correct misunderstandings exactly as you hear them, to be attached to a lot of different groups in the congregation so that you are seeing and hearing things in the congregation, those things that are going very well, those things that may need more education or more interpretation, and the capacity and willingness to speak to those kinds of things. So the Committee on Ministry models partnership and teamwork between the minister and the committee, but also between the committee and all of the ministry teams that we've been talking about. So let's take a moment to look at the selection process. There are several selection processes in operation in our different congregations. So the first place to look is to your bylaws to see what it says about the Committee on Ministry and its selection process. That is what must govern you now. Does the process of identifying and recruiting members reflect the purpose of this committee? Would be one of my major questions. Is it a partnership process so that the way we establish the committee is consistent with the goals and purpose of the committee? And if you found that that was not the case, you would be identifying either a blind spot or perhaps an assumption that could be some of the Committee on Ministry's work in clarifying how your congregation wants to begin thinking about the Committee on Ministry. So several of the ways that committees are determined, some are recruited by the Leadership Development Committee and then voted on by the congregation. In some situations, the board and minister consult and then recommend to the congregation for election. In some of our congregations, it's a board appointment. Sometimes the board appoints, and sometimes the minister and the board identify potential members together, and the board appoints. So our biggest question is whether or not the process of selecting the Committee on Ministry reflects its purposes and its most important work, which is to model the partnership and ministry that we all share. So one of the things you might look for is whether or not your process has ever asked the ministry teams who they think would be good on a Committee on Ministry. That does not commit you to nominating or appointing those people, but it would be a very interesting place to begin to surface names. If you were to describe the committee's work and ask different ministry teams, who would you think would be very good on a committee that did this kind of work, and see what names come from that solicitation. But just as we were clarifying a moment ago the distinctions between governance and ministry, it's often important for the committee to identify what are the ministries in your congregation and who cares about them. What I have found is that occasionally there are ministries that are struggling in a congregation, and part of why they struggle is that they have not kept up with the times, or they were developed at a period of time when they were critically important, and that is no longer the situation. Sometimes it has slipped off of the mission interest of your congregation, and we sometimes try to keep these things going when there isn't any energy or passion for them. So an inventory of what your ministries are and who cares about them and what the energy level is for them and whether they are consistent with fulfilling your mission can be an important place for a congregation to begin. So a short list of ministries in your congregation might include a ministry of hospitality, worship, and music, sometimes together, sometimes distinctly as separate ministries, faith formation or religious education, both for children, youth, and adults, a ministry of membership, where we are inviting people to understand Unitarian Universalism more deeply and align themselves with our values and congregation. Perhaps you have a small group ministry function that helps people identify and find themselves in small group ministries, or helps identify the curriculum that you will use for your short-term activities. Ministry of social change, I've mentioned a couple of times. One of the things that is important and different between our congregations is that some of our congregations are operating with a council model, and it can be very interesting to think about that council model and what the Committee on Ministries' role is with the council. I think it's a completely different workshop, so I'll just plant this seed to keep you thinking about it. But it has been my experience that a council model that involves every committee in the congregation is less effective than a council that involves the ministry teams that need to be coordinating, or the governance committees that need to be coordinating or consulting with the ministry teams. When we throw them all together, it's hard to find the specific common cause that holds the council agenda together. So I would hope that committees would make an annual plan. And I think in terms of continuity and confidence within the congregation, it's important to have a meeting between the outgoing members and the incoming members. I should have reframed that. I mean, those who are leaving and those who are remaining, not simply the outgoing and the incoming, but the whole team, including those members who are leaving the committee, so that you can carry through on any projects that have been begun this year, fulfill the promises that were made, kind of have an orientation with the whole committee for anybody who's coming in new. And to develop ways that you will model the partnership, and this meeting and a couple of other meetings that I will suggest to you is another way to model the partnership. I strongly recommend a day-long retreat to get acquainted and to make your plan for the year. The plan, your retreat might include we have increasingly a number of little surveys that you can do to identify your gifts or how you like to work in groups, or what kind of leadership you like to offer. There's the social styles inventory, the Myers-Briggs personality inventory, a thing called True Colors, which is based on Myers-Briggs. Some people are fond of the Enneagram. Kiersey Bates does a number of different profiles like this for relatively inexpensive online. You might also have what the UUA board calls a deep chair conversation, a conversation about something that's important to your congregation, about which you are making no decisions now. You are surfacing curiosities. You're seeing where one another's interests and concerns are around a big topic. Those we seldom give ourselves enough time to have those important conversations, and so modeling one in a retreat can be an especially effective way of helping you develop something of a habit. It would also be great to develop your meeting schedule at the retreat. How often will you meet? Will you meet regularly at a certain time each month? How will you use technology if someone's out of town? Will they be able to Skype into the meeting or conference call into the meeting so that you don't lose input when you could have had it through the use of technology? I strongly suggest to all the congregations in Mountain Desert District that there be 2 meetings a year with all the elected leaders of the congregation. And all the elected leaders in a congregation is different across our congregation. Some congregations elect only the Committee on Ministry, the Leadership Development Committee, and the board. Others elect a lot of committee chairs. But this is a way to hold the whole leadership together, communicate the information that everybody needs, perhaps have a briefing on a capital campaign that's coming up or a significant change that will be rolling out in the coming months so that everybody's on the same page about things. Also to provide an opportunity for coordination between these elected leaders. If you can calendar your plan, you can put your meetings with major ministry areas. If there's a ministry area that's having kind of a struggle, you might meet with them second, not first. You don't want to put them on the spot or make them feel defensive. You might meet with your most successful ministry team first and get acquainted, learn what they're curious about, learn how they've been working, what kind of support and assistance they need. And if there's one that struggles, you might meet with them second. Do you have new ministry initiatives? What kind of support do they need? What kind of budget have they been allocated? What kind of assistance are they getting in terms of recruiting people to help with this ministry? What kind of congregational education is needed in your particular context? It might be about the Committee on Ministry, certainly. It could also be about a new ministry initiative. If you've learned a lot when you met with the ministry initiative and recognize that that's not widely or commonly understood in the congregation, how would you help to facilitate that education? And then consider assessment and appreciation. When is this best done? It's really quite impossible to assess everything in a congregation all at the same time. So what kind of schedule would make sense to you? How do you express appreciation as the Committee on Ministry for the many gifts that people are bringing to the ministries? And how do you express that? Because people don't all want a plaque suitable, a certificate suitable for framing, but they all don't need a bouquet of flowers either. And so how do we kind of discern what different people will appreciate in terms of appreciation? So we've come to the big one. This is always the big one. And I think this slide really summarizes it so beautifully, I couldn't resist it. We want to be doing assessment because we want to increase quality, both the quality of the ministry we offer, but equally important, the quality of the experience our members are having as they offer this ministry. So we want to increase the quality of engagement, the level of satisfaction, as well as the quality of the ministry that is received by someone else. Too often in our culture, we think of feedback, we think of evaluation or performance evaluation, and we do have this notion that that is judging the quality, determining whether it is good enough. Now, most of our congregations simply do not do that to the ministry teams because that would be a peer-to-peer evaluation and judgment of quality. And very few of us have even the desire to do that. But let's think about how we might do assessment in a more productive way. And this is a primary Committee on Shared Ministry opportunity to help different ministry teams consider what regular feedback loops they would like to have. What are they curious about? What are they wondering about, and how could the committee help them get answers to that? So, you might speak to the membership ministry team, and they might be curious about how the path to membership is received. Are we telling people what they wanted to know about, or are we just giving them what we think they would be curious about? And so how would they find out? And you might help them figure out how to ask those kinds of questions, so that we might consider asking about the impact of the path to membership curriculum, just to continue that example. To think about impact would be, rather than asking questions of satisfaction, did you like that it was an hour and a half, or were the brownies good? You might ask what people are continuing to think about. You could leave that as a text box, and you would get whatever answers people, that would be very, very authentic if they can think of it and still give it to you in a text box. But you might also offer them some prompts. What of these things that we discussed in the path to membership are you still thinking about, or do you still want more information about? If it were not the path to membership, but were actually maybe an adult faith formation class, you might ask a question as bold as, what risks have you taken? Are you exposing yourselves to people who do not think as you do, or do not have the same beliefs? Or have you been willing to engage in some of our social change work by companioning people who are not Unitarian Universalists? What risks have you taken in service of your faith? I really urge you to avoid annual satisfaction surveys, and for the fundamental reason here on the slide that membership happiness is not our religious mission, that our mission is much more complex. It has to do with transformation, with building the beloved community, with building sustainable communities, those kinds of things. And to simply ask if people like things or if they were satisfied with things does not call them in that feedback loop. It doesn't call them to reflect on the highest purposes we share. I always think it's important to link assessment and feedback to the mission and goals. And when we do that, we can be using this as education as well. So we can keep the congregation focused on mission and goals by querying them about the mission. So it was, remembering that our mission is, which of these activities do you think have been most effective in its fulfillment? Or, inspired by our mission, we have offered the following adult classes. Which ones have you participated in? And then when they tell you which ones they've participated in, then you ask impact questions that have to do with that course. Another question might be, how do you rate your own actions to realize our goals? How well have you been part of the fulfillment of the mission? And you could give people a Likert scale, and for some people that will be a real piece of education, as they'll be suddenly thinking, what? I'm supposed to be doing something for this mission too? Wait a second, I hadn't been thinking about it that way. So if we can help ministry teams identify what they want to learn more about this year and help them figure out how to learn that, we can help them be more effective and their work to be more satisfying. I am a believer in SurveyMonkey. I know that it is not, people don't always like surveys, but I find this to be an instrument that is very flexible, and with some creativity, you can learn to ask questions that give you a tremendous amount of impactful information, and they tabulate everything for you. It's amazing. And so you can communicate very quickly in pictures or words the information that you've found. And as long as you kind of keep them short, I don't ask more than 5 questions. I do offer multiple choices and scales, and always a comment box if somebody needs to tell us something that we simply hadn't even thought to ask, then we want to know that as well. And so if these are going on periodically throughout the year with a select audience, those who have participated, those who have information to share, it's manageable feedback, it's actionable feedback. So, as I said before, I guess I got my script off here. We want to seek impact over satisfaction. We might ask a question from a faith formation on Unitarian Universalist family life. How is your family practicing Unitarian Universalism now? You could leave it as a text box and see what people say, or you could offer up as a reminder and reinforcer, because that's really our goal, is to keep reminding people and reinforcing our message. You might offer up the 5 ways that the class suggested that a family might practice its Unitarian Universalism together. So you might have a question. Are you lighting a chalice before significant conversations in your family? Do you say a gratitude blessing before meals? Whatever your course offered. So you get feedback, but you also reinforce your message, because it's not our goal to be doing that judgment thing. We want to reinforce our message, reinforce our ministry, and get feedback so that we can be more effective, more relational. Well, that's kind of a harsh transition there, isn't it? I probably need to put a slide in between these two. But it has been, letting go of the minister's compensation has been one of the hardest transitions for committees on ministry to make. This was in the old Ministerial Relations Committee model, and it's been difficult for committees to let go of. And perhaps it's been difficult for ministers to let go of. That may be why. But compensation is about equity and justice, and it's not about the ministries of the congregation. So it's much more consistently a personnel issue, which belongs in whatever place your congregation puts personnel issues. That might be with a personnel committee. It might be with the executive committee of your board. It might be with the entire board. But this would be an important one to move out of the Committee on Ministries domain. Ministers can have somewhat complex compensation strategies. That's certainly true. But it's not beyond other people understanding or being able to explain. It's not so esoteric that it needs its own committee in order to be understood. So I just liked this cartoon or this picture, so I thought we would introduce this conversation about difficult conversations with this. As I'm willing to trust and share and you're willing to listen, we have an opportunity to come to some new understandings. And that's always the opportunity that presents itself when we find ourselves in the midst of difficult conversations. It's certainly true that the Committee on Ministry can find itself having some difficult conversations. The various methods for fulfilling the mission may not be at all clear. Those might be difficult. How ministry teams collaborate might need conversation. Calendar or building use discrepancies, conflicts, disagreements might be another place that the Committee on Ministry might have a conversation at maybe a council meeting or between a couple of ministry teams who are trying to collaborate more effectively. Sometimes it's between ministry teams as they've not sufficiently aligned with one another. It can also be between ministry teams and elected leadership. That seems to come up most often around issues of budgeting. When a ministry team has a particular initiative that they're passionate about having funded, and the elected leadership perhaps simply doesn't have the funds or has chosen a different priority, there would be reasons to talk about that. Between ministry teams and the minister, who is a member of this congregation, around recommended changes or levels of accountability, or if the minister is the staff supervisor, around how other staff members work with different ministry teams, there might be difficult conversations there. And I think so long as we can address issues when they are difficult conversations, none of us get to kind of step away from difficult conversations. It's part of life and certainly part of relationships. And I think that handling these is different than being the designated conflict manager. So in difficult conversations, we would want to assume goodwill and intention. That's just 99.9% of the time exactly what we have. Sometimes misunderstandings of fact. Sometimes what feels like in the beginning, conflicts of intention. We want to balance our praise and feedback and be able to offer specific praise if you're going to offer difficult feedback. It's important to be able to say in the first person, I'm sure you've all heard that, and to be able to offer specific events. One that I was especially aware of that a committee on ministry told me about in one of the MDD congregations is that when the children left the first part of the service, they were sung out to one of our traditional songs, and they left the sanctuary. But they had been quiet and been good, sitting in their chairs in the big service, and they were quite noisy for a little while after they left. And yet the order of service always had a meditation right there. There'd just been a song. Now they had a meditation. There was a conversation that needed to happen about what might be a more productive way to handle that next 3 minutes after the children had left the worship service. So that would be a specific, and we could come up with a shift in the order of service between the worship team and the minister, the faith formation director, whoever needed to be involved. Frequently, if we have these difficult conversations, we do need to gather additional feedback to understand more fully what we have been given a glimpse of. And then the key thing, I think, is to develop a plan together so that you're not giving people orders about what they want to do or indicating that you've already solved it, but you've come with information and we're all in this together and we're better together. What shall we do? What experiment would be worthy of attempting? How would that give us more information? How long should we try that experiment? That's what the congregation with the noisy children and the meditation did. They shifted some elements of the order of service around a little until they found the thing best suited for immediately following the children's exit from the service. And they did a couple of experiments for a couple of months each, and then hit upon something that they really felt quite good about. So often these difficult conversations do need to result in an experiment that allows you to gather more information and try something. And that experiment language allows people to not feel that they have been unappreciated or that all their efforts have been ignored, but rather that together we're going to try a new thing and see if, all things being considered, we can come up with a new way to proceed. So this is your summary. This is your summary slide. So somebody asked earlier about the Committee on Shared Ministry and Congregational Conflicts, and I have confessed that Robert and I do not agree on this. I see the Committee on Ministry's role as much more mission-focused and ministry-focused. You are actually doing ministry to all the ministry teams in the congregation, helping them gather information they need, work together well, align with the mission, work with the minister to develop any changes that would be supportive of the mission of the congregation. And I think that to then label the committee as the designated manager of conflicts detracts from this. And also, whenever we say who manages conflicts and publicize that, we attract conflicts. That we've kind of demonstrated that several times. So we are at another question time, and so we can certainly discuss that further if you have any questions. Do we have anything in the text box, Larry?
Yes, we had a little bit back a comment from Grants Pass when talking participants on Committee on Ministry, their leadership, that they should focus their leadership on the COM and not be fragmented off into other leadership positions. And Grants Pass was commenting that those of us in small congregations must be in multiple leadership positions, and there's not enough people to handle all the roles.
I hear that from small congregations, and I think that they are, best served by having smaller groups and still trying hard not to have the same people on the board, the nominating committee, and the committee on ministry. It's just too much. And it's part of why some of these things become less effective, because you're asking too much of yourself to be doing all the leadership models. Perhaps you only have a committee on ministry of 3 and a board of 5. Or let's think creatively about the size of different groups and see if it's possible. Or perhaps you're trying to do too much, which is pulling you all a little bit too thin. So we want this work to be very rewarding, and I don't find that being on all these different leadership teams is the way for it to be the most rewarding for you. But you got to do what you got to do.
And then, Katie, I think, clarify if this is wrong, I think she was referring, when you were talking about the Committee on Ministry and having a get-together with everybody, perhaps you were talking about retreat, and she said, do you mean just the Committee on Shared Ministry or other ministries all? Katie, is that what you...
The day-long retreat I meant was for the Committee on Ministry. With the minister. The Committee on Ministry is the minister and the lay members of the committee. For them to have that kind of retreat. This work is so kind of different than other ministry teams or than governance, that without some of that opportunity to norm yourselves and to talk about a different way of leading and nurturing the congregation, it's very hard to implement this kind of model, because you're not functioning exactly the way any other committee in the church functions.
And Beth is wondering, who manages conflict?
Well, I think that managing conflict belongs with the board, personally. But some congregations that are larger have committees on right relationship, and those are committees who work to educate people about the behavioral covenant and the religious covenant of the congregation, and also try to address conflict in its earliest stages when it's still conversations and we can still navigate it well internally. But that would be a board decision or a congregation decision where the management of conflict, disagreement, there's stages of conflict, and so all of our congregations are really quite good at managing levels 1 and 2, which is a disagreement and a problem to solve. It isn't until it gets kind of to level 3 where there's kind of a contest going on and you can tell who's on different sides of this contest, who's on which team. That's when you need outside help. So you call your district staff people. If you wish to, you can call outside consultants. The Alban Institute has consultants who help congregations manage higher levels of conflict.
Okay, and there was a couple other people, I think, that answered their question about conflict as well, especially in smaller congregations. That can be a challenge. And Grants Pass wants to let you know that, yes, there are only 3 on their COM members.
Fine.
3OM. That's good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Should the minister be a voting member of this?
A voting member of the Committee on Ministry? You faded out on me.
Yes.
Could you ask that again?
Yes. Should the minister be a voting member of the Committee on Ministry?
Yes. I just doubt that you're going to be voting on very much. If you're developing policies and things like that, it's much more in a consensus model of wanting to be sure that people have been heard, and then any policies and procedures have to go to the board anyway, where the binding vote would take place. But But yes, a full and active member of the committee.
Okay, and then Bob's also asking, what about the role of the Committee on Ministry in managing polarities as differentiated from...
As differentiated from, I'm losing the last word of the sentence.
Sorry,
concept. Okay. I appreciate the sophistication of the question, Bob. That's fantastic. If congregations have become aware of the many polarities that we are always trying to manage, pretty much all of us need to be managing them. And certainly the Committee on Ministry will be faced with polarities that are active, sometimes between ministry teams, but also within ministry teams. So one of the most common polarities, for those who might not be recognizing this language, is the worship team or worship and music, if they are together in your congregation, deal with is the balance, which is a pretty tender balance in the worship environment, between tradition and innovation. That's a polarity. We can't choose always to stay the same, and we can't choose always to be changing. We need to find that, as I said before, tender balance between the two. And so that's a polarity that a number of ministry teams and a congregation as a whole is always trying to balance. And so a Committee on Ministry is well positioned to be, in the balcony, kind of recognizing or potentially recognizing we've got so many significant changes proposed for this year that we're really going to need to manage this carefully. Do we need to make this many changes all in one year? Or, which you may or may not. If you do, then each of them needs sufficient time and attention, and that would be part of a Committee on Ministry's invitation to collaborate between and among your ministry team.
And here's another one: is how or what is the role of the Committee on Ministry in congregations without a
minister? I don't know why I'm not getting the whole question. I'm sorry. It's exactly the same without the benefit of having a minister on the committee. So a Committee on Ministry in a congregation that is lay-led or that's fundamentally lay-led, doesn't have a contract or a called minister, is to coordinate the ministry team, to kind of be on the balcony and see that we are pulling together towards our identified mission, that there's more ministry, more goodness in the congregation than in the world. The fundamental work of the Committee on Ministry does not change.
Okay, it looks like that's all the questions, Nancy.
Wow, this is a good crowd. Are they watching their clocks, huh? So I have a resource page here that you'll find on the PowerPoint when we share that with you. And I think that we can do that sharing thing. Let me... Lori, tell me how to get my screen to reduce so that I can get to my share command. Okay. There we go. So let me share this PowerPoint with you. Okay. So that'll come to you with a live link for the Committee on Ministry pages on the UUA website, which I certainly commend to you. There are a number of different perspectives there, and you can put them in conversation and decide what's best for the size congregation, the complexity of your congregation, what will work best for you at this point in time. Completing the Circle is an excellent congregational assessment model. It's available through the Alban Institute. So if your congregation is at the point of wanting to do some assessment, this would not be a congregation-wide assessment, but would be more focused. This is a wonderful participatory methodology that you could use. And people often ask about anonymous feedback. I can't support anonymous feedback because it does not give us an opportunity to respond to what is needed by anybody. So I'm hopeful that you will simply ask for somebody's name. If there's a reason why you need to know their tenure as a member, then you would ask 2 or 3 demographic questions in your survey. We have a number of congregations who do what they call a snapshot survey of the full congregation, just maybe once a year. It has a couple of different names. You may have come across it also. And this can be helpful over time if you're committed to doing it, pretty much the same survey, ideally based upon your mission or your goals. And over time, you can see whether the congregation is seeing the fulfillment of their goals or the realization of their mission. These are less helpful if you're just doing it as a one-shot thing. It gives you a little bit of information, but not nearly all that would be helpful to you. If you were to do it with a new long-range plan, and you would to do a snapshot survey at May of every year with very similar questions and see what progress you can note from the understanding of the full congregation. So with that, I'll close our time together by extinguishing our chalice with these words by my friend Elizabeth Sully Jones. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. As we close tonight, you will see a small survey, and we hope that you'll take it right now this evening so that our webinars can continue to be presented to you and just get better and better, more closely meet your needs. Thank you for joining us tonight.